Hello, I'm John Cullum. In this evening's ABC Theater presentation of The Day After, I play a father in a typical American family who experienced the catastrophic events of a full-scale nuclear war. Before the movie begins, we would like to caution parents about the graphic depiction of nuclear explosions and their devastating effects. The emotional impact of these scenes may be unusually disturbing, and we are therefore recommending that very young children not be permitted to watch. In homes where young people are watching, we'd like to suggest that the family watch together so that parents can be on hand to answer questions and discuss issues raised by the movie. Immediately following The Day After, ABC will present a special edition of Viewpoint that will explore some of the political, military, and psychological aspects of the nuclear age. In a moment, The Day After.
I'm David Hartman. How will America react to the day after? Well, tomorrow on Good Morning America, we'll return to Lawrence, Kansas, and find out what the people there thought about tonight's movie. Also, what effect might the day after have on the nuclear arms debate? We'll find out tomorrow on Good Morning America.
Because the graphic depiction of the effects of a nuclear war may not be suitable for young viewers, parental discretion is advised.
Is anybody there? Anybody at all?
The following suggested reading list, compiled in cooperation with the American Library Association, will provide additional information on a variety of subjects related to the nuclear issue. Nuclear Madness by Dr. Helen Caldicott. On Thermonuclear War by Herman Kahn. Nuclear War Survival Skills by Dr. Crescent Kearney. Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy by Dr. Henry A. Kissinger. U.S. Office of Technology Assessment Staff. Check your library or bookstores for these and other titles.
I'm Chuck.
What can be done to prevent nuclear war? That's our focus tonight on a special edition of ABC News ViewPoint. We'll hear from Secretary of State George Shultz, and we'll discuss the issues with Henry Kissinger, Carl Sagan, Elie Wiesel, Brent Scowcroft, William F. Buckley, Jr., and Robert McNamara. Our live audience here in Washington will ask questions on Viewpoint. That's next on ABC.
Ted Koppel.
There is, and you probably need it about now, there is some good news. If you can, take a quick look out the window. It's all still there. Your neighborhood is still there, so is Kansas City, and Lawrence, and Chicago, and Moscow, and San Diego, and Vladivostok. What we have all just seen, and this was my third viewing of the movie, what we've seen is sort of a nuclear version of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. Remember Scrooge's nightmare journey into the future with the spirit of Christmas yet to come? When they finally return to the relative comfort of Scrooge's bedroom, the old man asks the spirit the very question that many of us may be asking ourselves right now. Whether, in other words, the vision that we've just seen is the future as it will be, or only as it may be. Is there still time? To discuss, and I do mean discuss, not debate, that and related questions tonight, we are joined here in Washington by a live audience and a distinguished panel of guests. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Elie Wiesel, philosopher, theologian, and author on the subject of the Holocaust, William F. Buckley, Jr., publisher of the National Review, author, and columnist, and former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, who wrote in the current edition of Foreign Affairs that nuclear weapons are totally useless except only to deter one's opponent from using them. That's our panel, and you'll be hearing from them in just a few moments. But first, joining us live from his home in suburban Washington is the Secretary of State, Mr. George Shultz. Mr. Secretary, if I put to you the question that Scrooge put to the spirit of Christmas yet to come, the future as we've just viewed it tonight, is that the future as it will be or only the future as it may be?
Neither. That is not the future at all. The film is a vivid and dramatic portrayal of the fact that nuclear war is simply not acceptable. And that fact and the realization of it has been the basis for the policy of the United States for decades now. The successful policy of the United States, based on the idea that we simply do not accept a nuclear war, and we've been successful in preventing it.
Mr. Schultz, that is the answer of a Secretary of State to a reporter, and that's fair enough because that's what you and I respectively are. But what if you were answering the question to your son or to your granddaughter? What would a grandfather, what would a George Schultz who is talking to a member of his family say in response to the same question? Same answer?
Well, I would give the same answer. And since children these days are in many respects smarter, it seems to me, than their elders, they would ask a lot of questions about that. And I think it's possible to explain why it is that it's possible to have a policy that prevents nuclear war.
I guess what some of those smart youngsters are worried about and what a lot of smart older people are worried about too is not so much the policy but just the presence of so many nuclear weapons, so many nuclear warheads in the world. And the question, which I now address to you, with so many of them, is it not inevitable that at some point or another they will be used? And if not, why do we need them?
The only reason that we have nuclear weapons, as President Reagan said in Japan recently, is to see to it that they aren't used. We have to provide a balance so that others who have nuclear weapons, particularly the Soviet Union, realize that what could happen to us could happen to them.
I think unhappily the Secretary of State misses the point. The whole point of this movie is to launch an enterprise that seeks to debilitate the United States.
May I ask you just to move in a little closer to your microphone?
It seeks to debilitate the United States. This is terribly plain. The guy who wrote it says, I would like to see people starting to question the value of defending this country with a nuclear arsenal. That is his motive, and people who have seen the film, who have sought to debilitate American defenses, have gathered around it. It's become a cause militant. It has a totemic significance, and I'm delighted to hear the Secretary of State say such calm and lucid and cogent things, but that's unrelated to the effort of this film.
You think that there is a deliberate political effort behind this film, or are you prepared to concede that if indeed there is one, it may be accidental?
Well, it's certainly deliberate on the part of the writer. He says that was his motives. Now, if you say, was it deliberate on the part of the shareholders of ABC, I don't think they were consulted.
I think in this country we've been sleepwalking during the last 38 years and passed this problem without really coming to grips with how dire and compelling it is. And I think ABC should be congratulated for spurring what I hope will be a year-long debate on this issue. But it's my unhappy duty to point out that the reality is much worse than what has been portrayed in this movie. And this new emerging reality has significant policy implications. The nuclear winter that will follow even a small nuclear war, especially if cities are targeted, as they almost certainly would be, involves a pall of dust and smoke which would reduce the temperatures not just in the northern mid-latitudes, but pretty much globally to sub-freezing temperatures for months. In addition, it's dark. The radiation from radioactivity is much more than we've been told before. Agriculture will be wiped out, and it's very clear that beyond the 1 or 2 billion people who would be killed directly in a major nuclear war, 7,000 megatons, something like that, the overall consequences would be much more dire, and the biologists who've been studying this think that there is a real possibility of the extinction of the human species from such a war.
Let me turn to you and ask you then, if indeed one accepts either Dr. Sagan's version or the version that we saw here, we are in either case talking about damage and loss of life unparalleled in human history. How is it possible, under any circumstances, to conceive of the use of nuclear weapons?
Well, I think that this film presents a very simple-minded notion of the nuclear problem. And it deals with the most obvious question, that a general nuclear war aimed at cities is a disaster and a catastrophe. I wrote a book on this subject 30 years ago when the notion of general nuclear war first arose. The problem of our period, the problem we have to grapple with, is how to avoid such a war, how to preserve freedom while seeking to avoid such a war, how to create a military establishment that reduces the dangers of such a war, what arms control policies are compatible with this policy, how we handle crises. Those are serious questions. To engage in an orgy of demonstrating how terrible the casualties of a nuclear war are, and translating into pictures the statistics that have been known for 3 decades, and then to have Mr. Sagan say it's even worse than this, I would say, what are we to do about this? Are we supposed to make policy by scaring ourselves to death, or is somebody going to make some proposals of where we are supposed to go?
I think much can be done, Mr. Koppel, much that we're not doing. And I want to start by emphasizing, I'm not talking about the Reagan administration, I'm talking about several different administrations, but most of all, I'm talking about the American people. I do not believe the American people understand the world we live in. I do not believe they understand the full risk that we face. There are 40,000 nuclear warheads in the inventories of the U.S. and the Soviet Union today, with a destruction power roughly 1 million times that of the Hiroshima bomb. I don't know any arms expert, and I doubt if anyone in this room believes that in the next 10 to 15 years we can reduce that number by more than half. And we're still going to be living then in a world 15 years from now with 20,000 nuclear weapons, and frankly, I think that's very unlikely to get that low, but just assume that.
What makes you think we'll be alive 15 years from now?
Because in addition to stressing reduction in the numbers of weapons, we need to stress introducing stability in the forces to avoid temptation to either side to preempt, and most of all, we need to introduce steps to reduce the risk that those weapons will be used. And I don't want to take more of my time, but I'll be quite happy during this program to outline a whole series of those steps.
Well, in fact, you stopped short of where I thought you were going. Let us assume for a moment the desirable but probably the unthinkable, and that is that we could somehow agree to do away with all nuclear weapons. We still live with the knowledge of how to make them. How does one live in a nuclear world, one which we will never be able to turn back?
We live in a nuclear world by stressing that this is a plus-sum game that we're working on. There is a commonality of interest between the Soviets and the U.S. to avoid the use of these weapons. That's what that film shows. I totally disagree with those who say it's a disservice to the nation to show the film. Not at all. It's stimulating discussion on exactly the issue we ought to be discussing. There is 1 million times the Hiroshima destruction power out there.
May be unthinkable, but deterrence is a very ambiguous notion. It cannot be demonstrated unless it fails, in which case you knew it was not there. Otherwise, it cannot be demonstrated. We have probably very different ideas about deterrence than does the Soviet Union. I think we tend to think that nuclear weapons have done away with war as an instrument of national policy, that it is insane, that the mere existence of nuclear weapons mean that nuclear war cannot happen, as you suggest.
Well, forgive me, there are something like 42, 43, or maybe 44 wars going on in the world right now, so clearly it hasn't done away with war. Are you talking about
Nuclear
war?
I'm talking about a U.S.-Soviet nuclear exchange, like the movie. The Soviet Union, however, both as a result of its history of repeated invasion and the extent to which ideology still motivates its belief that it is surrounded by hostile states, probably wants nuclear war no more than does the United States, but I think realistically anticipates that it could happen. And I think it is that is the central issue of deterrence, and that is we must have a military posture which the Soviets, whatever they think about deterrence, whatever they think about the nature of nuclear weapons, can never imagine that resort to them makes sense. I'm not sure that's clear at this point.
Not being a nuclear specialist in any way, I'm scared. I'm scared because I know that what is imaginable can happen. I know that the impossible is possible. I've seen the film, and while I was watching it, I had a strange feeling that I had seen it before. Except once upon a time it happened to my people. And now it happened to all people. And suddenly I said to myself, maybe the whole world, strangely, has turned Jewish. Everybody lives now facing the unknown. We are all, in a way, helpless. We are talking about nuclear arms, about the bomb with a capital B, a kind of divinity in itself, unless those who know militarily what it means, we readers, writers, people, we don't know what it all means. When I hear about 1,000 bombs, megatons, I don't have that kind of imagination. To me, it's an abstraction. What to me all this means is that the human species may come to an end.